On YouTube, this is Brian916. Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the channel. So on the rack here, I got this big Dodge diesel that I'm working on. It belongs to my tow driver. He brought it in for brakes. In the process of doing the brakes, I discovered that the passenger side rear axle seal was leaking. And so I told him, let's go ahead and do axle bearings and axle seals while we're in there. And let's take a look at the other side. And let's also do a differential service. Well, he requested the diff service as well. So this is where I am in the process. I'm actually going to start this video in process because while editing some other video, I accidentally deleted a couple of scenes. So look and see if this side is leaking. So let's get the rotor on. Goofy little clips that hold the rotor in from the factory. So we gotta get rid of those. Let's look behind this thing and see what it looks like. He still may be able to get a lot of life left out of the seal. So we'll go ahead and leave this alone. And we'll just do the other side and a differential service he requested. So let's start tearing into that other side. All right, let's start tearing into this thing. Let's see, what size is that? 15 millimeter maybe? 14 millimeter. Maybe an SAE size. Here. Yeah, SAE bolt 9/16. And grab a socket for that. one more. Here. Looks like we got a snap ring here. Yeah, I think I could feel the parting line on it. And then it looks like there's a net behind here. So let's get the rest of that stuff off so we can keep removing it. We get to our seal and our bearing. I'm gonna go ahead and replace the seal and the bearing. Makes sense to get them both while we're in here. Yeah. Just like I thought. A retaining ring. Alright, well, let's get this thing out. And it looks like here's I think there's threads. Yeah. Threads. Oh, what do we have here? And there's a little locking pin in here. Just a little locking pin out. Let's see. Now we got a screw. Spin this thing on out. Oh yeah. Just a nut. Alright, what do we have here? Alright, so our bearings are visible. I don't feel anything else in here. So at this point, it looks like there's just a bearing, so we probably could slide this big drum off. Let's see if we can get it off. Yeah, let's see. Let's get this bearing out first since it already almost came out. At this point, I think we could just pull this thing off. But hold on, let me grab this part from O'Reilly's really quick, and we'll get right back to it. Alright, this thing don't want to come out, so let's pull out the big guns. I think we got it. Alright guys, this is where we left off. Let's clean the emergency brake cable down really good with some brake clean. Got that good and clean. Clean these spray these little threads out. On the axle tube, we'll also clean where our bearing rides on this axle tubing. Get that nice and clean as well. Get the threads cleaned out. Alright, so that looks good. Now let's head over to our workbench and get these bearings and seals installed. Alright, so here's our hub here. Take a look at it. See what we need to do. So it looks like some of the seal is still on here. I believe the seal is like a two-part seal. So this seal's still on it. So we'll get this seal out and the other bearing out. Put it in this vise. Alright, so we got it secure in the vise. Tighten it up a bit. Alright, so let's pop this seal out. Got our seal out. Got our bearing out. All right, I think I'm gonna go ahead and knock new races in here, because last thing you want to do is get some play in this wheel, because the race is worn down a few thousandths of an inch, and over time start to develop a little wobble in the wheel. While we're in here, we might as well go ahead and put some races in there and go ahead and do a full service on it. So since it's already turned up this way, I'm gonna knock the outer race out. So let me find something to knock it out with. Be right back. See if this punch is long enough. That should do. All right, so I'm just gonna use a punch, knock it out. got the race out. Loosen up the hub out of the vise. Retrieve our race. Now let's flip it upside down. Do the same thing. Alright, I'm going to knock the other bearing race out. It's almost out. It's acting stubborn. So we'll have to pull out the persuader. Let me grab some safety glasses. Safety first. All right, let's get it out. Alright, got that last one out. The two bearing races we pulled out. Let's just make sure that our new bearing races match up before we start trying to hit them in. Other one. Now we confirmed we got the right bearing races. Let's knock them in. All right, so we're gonna clean the inner portion of our hub out with some brake clean. We wanna clean the race off too. You wanna hit these in dry, okay? Because you don't want your bearing race to be able to slide or move inside of here. So you want it to be clean and dry when you knock them in. So let's clean it up in here and get it ready. Cleaned up. this bad boy knocked in. Alright. Got it nice and straight. Now I'm just going to use the other seal, or the other race, to finish beating it in. Alright, so it needs to be hit down just a bit more. Hit the rest of the way down. With the punch. Make sure we fully seat it. So we fully seated, got that race all the way in. So now what we're gonna do is flip it around and get the other one in. But on this side, I can use my race installer tool because it's not quite as big as the other side. The other side I didn't have a adapter big enough. So I had to make do. Same thing, clean it out. Cleaning it with the brake clean. I'm gonna hit this surface because there's actually a gasket that goes in between. There's actually a gasket that goes in between the hub and the axle flange. So I got a new one, but while I'm cleaning up top, I'm gonna go ahead and clean the surface. Same thing on this side. Clean it off. Give me a clean paper towel. Alright, let's get my race nice and cleaned up. Got it nice and clean in there. Alright, nice. So I I use my bearing race install tool on this particular side. Looking good. So much easier with this bearing tool. This is the largest size I have though, so I couldn't do it on that other one. That's it. No mas. All right. Got our race installed. So now what we're gonna do is coat these bearings with some gear oil and knock our seal in. Get this thing back on this truck. Got our new bearings. Coat them. A little bit of gear oil. Fits in there good. So we're gonna just leave this one in here, coat it in a little gear oil. Now let's get the back part on and get the seal in here. Same thing on this one. Coat this one up. Go on and drop that one in. See how it seats. Oh yeah, that's looking good. Okay. Now we can get our seal in. And grab something to cut this seal open with. Take a minute to make sure there ain't no burrs around here. Because if you got a burr around this lip, it can leak in between the burr and the seal. If you do got a burr on it, if you're ever doing a job like this, get you a file and run it down smooth. Let me get a little piece of flat steel to hit that in even. Just gonna use my fan clutch tool. All right, seals in. We're ready to put this thing back on the car. All right, so I'm gonna coat the axle tubing with a little bit of gear oil because the seal has to slide up over this back raised area. So it was difficult getting this hub out because the seal was stuck on this back part. So I assume it's probably gonna be a nice little snug fit. So just help it on, lube it up. All right, let's get it on. Alright, looks like we got it on. Alright, let's get our outer bearing installed. All right, it's nice and seated. Okay, that's what we need. Now let's go and grab our retaining nut, locking pin, and retaining ring. All right, so first things first, let's get our nut on here. Supposed to use a special socket for this thing, but I never buy those things. Maybe I should. Okay, so this is where that socket comes in handy, because to do the adjustment on this thing, you need to tighten this up first and move the hub around, make sure everything seats, and compress everything together that may need to be tightened up. So what I'm gonna do is just tap it then. let's loosen it back up. Alright, so now we got free play on these bearings, and this will hold the bearing. The nut will keep the bearings in place right where they are, and then we'll just use this pin right here is what locks the nut in place so it can't spin. Check for play. We got 0 movement, nice and stiff. Looks like we're in good shape. And then this little retaining ring keeps the little lock pin from coming out. Alright, now we're ready to get the axle back in here. But before we do that, I'm going to take the bolts and I'm going to clean the bolts up that go around here. They had a lot of Loctite on them, so I'm going to clean those bolts off and put fresh Loctite on them. Let's go clean them up. You can see these got all this Loctite crud on there. I want to run some fresh Loctite on it. So I'm gonna clean this old stuff off. Axle flange has a gasket that goes on here. So I'm just going to clean it off before we slide our axle in. Get all the gear oil off of it. Okay. Open up our gasket. See what we got. So here's our gasket. We'll get that installed. All right, let's get this surface degreased. So down to 2. We'll just take a look in there. Make sure everything looks normal. Everything looks normal. All right, let's slide our axle. some Loctite on it. I use the red on this. I usually use red Loctite on anything that rotates pretty fast. Cam bolt, like this, the axle shaft, the axle flange, flywheels, clutch pressure plates, stuff like that. Blue Loctite, I'll use the medium strength more on like maybe a brake caliper bracket or oil pans, stuff like that. Some oil pans use like a really light torque on them, like maybe a Honda or something like that. If you tighten up the gasket too tight, it'll just mushroom the gasket out. But then if those bolts back out a little bit too, it's gonna leak. Or if you over tighten it, it's gonna leak. So in those cases, I use like just snug it up just a bit with some blue Loctite. It usually holds up. I'm missing a bolt in the back. Spec would be nice on these, but I didn't really take the time to look it up. But judging by the length, thickness, and material of the bolt, give you a good idea how tight you can tighten it. Oh yeah. Wow, all of these are snug pretty good. And that Ingersoll, that was only half strength. I didn't put it on full power. And this thing's, oh yeah, that ain't going nowhere. All right. Half strength. All right, so now we gotta get the brakes on, and that should do it for good to go. So let's get the brakes on. Before I slide the rotor on, I'm gonna change my gloves. These gloves got a lot of gear oil on them. I don't want that stuff on the rotor. We need to get the bracket on, but first I'm gonna take this over to the wire wheel and clean it up. All right, so we got the brackets cleaned up. This is where we're gonna install our the brake hardware. So we wanna make sure that we install it on a nice clean surface. let me go and put my new brake hardware on. If you happen to be doing this job, before you put your brake hardware on, notice that there's a short section behind the rotor. There's not much real estate here. And then over here, you got a lot more real estate. Notice that it'll be the same way on the brake caliper hardware. Notice that this side, there's a lot more real estate over here. That's a lot shorter over there. So to make sure you get them on correctly. All right, let's get our brake pads in. Wouldn't be a professional brake job without grease, right? So let's grease it up. All right. All right, let's do the same in the back. Okay, got our brake pads installed. Let's get the caliper on it, and we'll be home free on this side. All right, so when I do this, I typically wear a dust mask. So if you're doing this, put a dust mask on. Switch my bits. All right, now we can put some grease on it. What's the point of putting grease on top of dirt? If you're gonna really grease up, lubricate your brake system, it's gotta be clean. Or you might as well just leave it alone. All right. So I've already lubed these sliding pins already. So no point in doing it twice. Get our bolt started. so I'm gonna set this to hand tight, on a hand tight setting. Just to run it in. I'm gonna use a quarter to torque it down. It's so easy to strip caliper bolts, especially on Chryslers, Dodge and stuff. They use real skinny brake caliper bolts, fine thread, so you really don't need a whole lot of torque on them. If you feel like you gotta torque it that hard, just put some Loctite on it and make it feel better. Alright, let's get this tire up on here. Oh boy. Whew. That's heavy. I used to work on commercial vehicles too. Once upon a time, this tire wouldn't have been nothing. But it's been a long time since I worked on garbage trucks and things like that. City recycle vehicles, city garbage trucks, transit, bus transit tires, and brakes and stuff like that. Now one of these truck tires almost killed me. I was in much better shape back then, I guess. All right, so I'm gonna run this down with the earthquake. Run it down with the earthquake. Put a little bit of length on it to take away from some of the torque. This thing is strong. Put a little length on it and make me a little makeshift torque stick. Alright, got that side. So same exact procedure on this side, guys. We see this side was nice and dry, so I didn't do it. My tow guy asked me if I wanted to do it, just go ahead and do it anyway, but I'm just, in some scenarios I will do things in pairs, but in this case, I mean, we were just repairing a leak, and if it's not leaking, then there's no reason to repair it. So the only reason I did bearings on the other side is because I was already in there, but the real fix was just to replace that axle seal. So might as well throw some new bearings in there while we're in there. So this side, I went ahead and left it alone. Some people have different, strategies or methods. They may feel it's a good idea to do both, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So there's no leaks here, there's no bearing issues. Who knows, he may get another 2 or 3 years out of this, and there was no reason to do that repair to begin with. So, all right, so let's seal up our diff. Just wipe it down a little bit. Get some of this oil off the surface. All right, so let's get our cover back on. Just went and cleaned the cover out. Got all the dirt, grime out of it. This particular vehicle uses a gasket. So we're going to use this rubber gasket for it. So get it all started. Flange seal and the bearing seal too. I had to wait on those a couple of days for them to come in. Torque it down by hand. Fill it up. All right, so there's a fill plug right here. Usually I just use a fluid pump, but I might be able to just get this one without one. Once I can just sort of squeeze it in there. Alright, it's full. We can put our fill plug in. You can look in there. You'll see that it's nice and filled up with gear oil. Alright, so let's put our fill plug in. Let's get this thing down on the ground. bearings aren't packed with grease. They are lubricated from gear oil from the differential. So let's jack one side up. Get on over. Alright, so we got it tilted to one side, letting some of that gear oil shift on over to feed those bearings we just put in there. So we'll just let it sit for a minute, work its way in there. Alright guys, that completes the repair. This is Brian 916. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe. We'll see you on the next one.